I'm a small town kid born with a big city spirit. I choose to play a lot of awesome roles in life.
I'm none of those things. But I do still have some things in common with Tiffany. I'm a founder, podcast host and producer, human raiser, a believer in magic, and homegirl to Austin, aka my husband. 5 years ago, I founded the production company Share Your Genius. We're in the messy middle, and I'm liking some of it, hating some of it, but loving it all, obviously. I'm Rachel Downey, and this is my takeover of Scared Confident. When I first heard the words scared confident to describe the journey that Tiffany Souter went on, I almost had an out-of-body experience because I had never had anyone articulate so crisply the experience that I was literally living. So for those who aren't familiar with my voice, why should you be? I'm often sort of behind the screen, not behind the mic. And I've had the opportunity to produce Scared Confident since its inception in, 2020. Since then, Tiffany and I's relationship has gone from client and producer, mentor to friend. She's now a owner at Share Your Genius. And with that comes all sorts of opportunities and learnings and stories. I founded Share Your Genius right when I had my first kid. Through building this business and navigating life as a new parent, a business owner, leader, all of those things, Scared Confident is the best way to describe that journey. And so what I wanted to do in this takeover was actually take some time to pause and share our road from zero to what will be our first 7-figure year. It's a big milestone for a company to get there because it gives you the opportunity to say, wow, we're a real company. We've got amazing clients. We have the ability to build a team. We have the opportunity to put some infrastructure around us. And what's it going to take to go to the next level? So I wanted to first pause and go back, kind of share some of the early stories, share some of the present before I ever have the opportunity to do something as profound as the first 17 years. Be great. For me, be great ultimately comes down to one word, and that word is choice. So often in life, we are given the opportunity to be average, be good, status quo, or be great. And it all comes down to our behaviors, our habits, and our decisions. We are the total sum of the decisions we make and the relationships that we foster. And so when we think about those words, be great, it has to be personal because it comes down to the choice that you make day in and day out to be great. June 2016, 4 o'clock in the morning, I woke up in the middle of the night thinking that I was experiencing a miscarriage. I calmly looked over at my husband, woke him up, and said, "Hey, we got to go to the hospital." And for some reason, I just had this calm about me. We got to the hospital. Literally, I was just sitting there kind of just like, just tell me, man. Just tell me that the baby's gone. Like, I want to move on. You know what I mean? That's just how my mind works. At the time, I was 24 weeks pregnant. And they hooked me up to the portable ultrasound. And all of a sudden, I just heard, and it was very faint, but I heard the beat, and it was a heartbeat. And that is actually when I started to feel emotion because it was just like this insane sense of relief that, my girl was still kicking. The doctor was like, the reality is you're not leaving the hospital. And the biggest thing that we need to do right now is keep you from going into full labor. I then spent the next 2 weeks in the hospital, unable to move because I was told not to. When you're in it, it feels like forever. When you're alone by yourself, all day, every day. Even if you have visitors popping in between, it's really hard to keep your mind from going negative or going south. You have doctors coming in basically saying, "Hey, keep your baby in, keep your baby in. We don't know what's wrong." And so it's really hard to keep your mind from going into negative places. I started listening to podcasts. I found podcasts to be a medium that kept my mind in a positive place. And I would just spend time imagining what Lennon would look like. I spent time imagining what our life would look like. I spent time imagining what I wanted for our future. And that's what I would do. I would listen to podcasts and I would imagine these different scenarios. She ended up being born at 26 weeks and 6 days to be exact. It sounds crazy, but those are the moments that became the foundation and the seeds that ultimately led me to leaning in and helping to build Share Your Genius. While I was spending time at the hospital after Lennon was born, she was in the NICU for about 83 days. At that same time, Jim reached out to me.
So I am pretty sure you were still in college when I met you. They have the grit and determination.
This is Jim Brown.
So I always admired that about you, and I knew you were going to do something amazing. So I tried to stay in touch with you for a while, and multiple times I reached out to you saying, "Hey, I'm thinking about this, or I'm thinking about that," looking for help or an employee or someone, right? And you would never take the bait. You would always tell me someone else that I should talk to. I'm like, "Rachel, I mean you." And you never, ever took that.
Jim Brown was somebody that I had always stayed connected with. We would meet every quarter or so, catch up on life, talk about business, just see what was going on in each other's worlds. I had mad respect for the way his brain worked because it was very opposite from mine. And I continually just wanted to learn from him. So he and I would meet randomly and occasionally, but also intentionally.
When I was thinking about launching my podcast, which seems like it was an eternity ago now, I knew that I needed help and I wanted your help. So I thought it was a new enough medium that we really couldn't screw it up. So let's just go have some fun and try some stuff. And so I remember meeting with you at Starbucks at 71st and Benford and telling you about all of the ideas. And you're like, "Yes, I'm in. I want to do it. I don't care about pay. Like, don't pay me anything." Like, I was like, "That's weird." So we started. We literally just
I
kind of
was in my
started
third
from
semester of law school.
and it wasn't
On
a lot.
top of the
Maybe like
freelance work I was doing, I was
4,
also
6,
doing
8 weeks
additional freelance
tops.
work
And you're like,
from a
"Hey,
marketing ops and
I
project
can't do
management
this
standpoint.
anymore. Like, I'm
And then,
pregnant.
of
I'm going to
course,
law school.
being at the
I need
hospital
a
and trying
job,
to
full time
navigate
job,
what
but
life was going to be like with Lennon.
something's got to
And
give."
ultimately, I came to the conclusion like I was just doing too much. And so I had just decided to move on from helping Jim with his podcast, Sales Tuners. Jim has an incredible standard of excellence, and it's something that I admire, and it's something that has helped me increase my standard of excellence. But at that time in my life, I was just like not in it. Like I was like, I don't want to be this challenged. I don't want to be pushed this much.
I'm going to law school.
I need
I
things
want to
to
get
be
a
good
job, full time
enough.
job.
And
Like,
Jim wasn't having it.
something's got
So
to
I
give.
said, I
And
can't do this.
unfortunately, it
And
just
so I
wasn't.
walked away.
That kind of pissed me off. And I think I even came back, maybe not in the moment, but like a day or so later and said, "Hey, I totally get that something has to give, but why does it have to be this? Like, what if?" Right. And kind of went down that path. And so I think you might have thought about it, but you said it's just now's not the time. But then it was like 3 months later, 4 months later, you came back and you're like, "Okay, so I made the wrong call. I want to do something with you, but I've got a bigger idea." And
So I think
you
from
threw
the
out the idea of making
beginning,
it
it was always
a
going to be
podcast
bigger than
publicist.
sales tuners.
That was
I really
the
went into the
original
podcast game, if
idea.
you will, thinking that I would be a podcast publicist, which would be like pitching people on shows and helping businesses get on podcasts and maybe manage talent and all that kind of stuff. That was where my head was. When I approached him from the beginning, it was never going to be sales tuners because he had already sort of filled the role of who was going to support him on that opportunity. And so for him, he was like, all right, well, this has to be a business, which means that we have to have clients. And this means that we have to be doing things for people.
I believed
And so
Uncovered
that's
is
what we
going to
did.
be something. You believed Share Your Genius could be something.
It was just kind of funny how all of that timing ultimately works out. But And I remember you just being like, what's the minimum you need to live? Like, what's like the minimum?
That's true. I
And
remember that
then,
conversation.
yeah. And then I ran downstairs and I was like, Austin. And he was like, yeah, what's up? And I was like, okay, here's the thing. I could go, and I had all these interviews lined up at little like local tech companies. And I was like, look, I can go do that and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, and I was pitching him this whole thing. And then 5 minutes later, he comes back to me and he's like, all right, look, if you can just bring home, I think it was like 400, $500 a week, something like that. He was like,
The
if you can,
crazy number.
yeah, he was like, if you can just bring that home, go do whatever you want. And then I remember like, I was like, are you sure? You sure? I'm going to go do this. And then I immediately like called or texted you. I don't know, but it's just kind of funny how that stuff plays out over time.
Most people aren't willing to do that. They're not willing to actually bet on themselves.
For whatever reason, I was just like, even if there was ever conflict between us, like healthy or not, like I never doubted that you were in my corner. You know what I'm saying? So that also allowed it to be easier for me to sort of bet on myself because I was like, well, Jim's not going to like let me drown. I was just hustling. I was like, I would meet with anybody that would say yes. I mean, I met with so many people, it was dumb. And I just loved it. I freaking loved what podcasting could do. I had never seen a content channel work that way before. It could drive relationships, it could drive revenue, and it created content waterfalls. And I'm like, why aren't people doing this? Like, what is wrong with people? So I was like on this mission, it felt like. And what was interesting about that time in life is Jim was running a sales training, coaching, and development company while doing his podcast as a way for him to kind of generate his own opportunities and content and all that kind of stuff and learn and all those things that podcasts do. And so we were kind of working in silos in a way. Like we would meet to talk about what was going on, to share ideas, and he would really work with me on how I showed up in sales conversations and positioning and just building out my confidence and my mindset and all that kind of stuff.
Getting comfortable with who you were as a person. Starting to get to the point where you realize like what other people's opinions don't matter. Like you started to get there. I think that's the biggest thing. And there's so many other aspects just of confidence that we could talk about. But I think that another big one was just like you started to really understand the difference between leadership and management. They are not the same thing at all. Leaders inspire others to be great. Managers get shit done. They make sure you cross the T and dotted the I and did it in the right order, right? Like no one's inspired by managers. Do we need them? Yeah, in a lot of cases we do. But that's not leadership. And also leadership is not doing all the work yourself. That will kill you. So I think
He was in a really interesting life transition because he had been planning to do this trip for years. I mean, I remember him talking to me about this trip before he and I ever talked about him doing a podcast. He was like, no, in 3 years, I'm traveling the world. We're going to go to a different country and live there for 1 month for 12 months. So that was, January 1st, I would say real deal closed. And then in December of 2018, I found out I was pregnant with my second daughter, Olive, who I had not planned on having like at that point in my life. I was really just like, let's grow this thing and do this thing. And so I was very nervous to tell Jim that I was pregnant because there was so much hanging in the balance, it felt. And I was very nervous to tell you, but I want to know if you remember what, like me telling you and what went through your head.
Gosh, do I remember you telling me that one? So this is gonna sound a bit crazy, Rachel. People usually are not thinking about you. It's usually the case. I had in my world, a really big life event that was about to happen. I was moving out of my house and leaving the country for a year. I heard you for sure, but I was like, girl, this is on you. Can you still get the work done that you've promised? Like, what are you going to do? You'd already proven to me that like you are a person who's just not going to let things fall. You're going to get the work done. I probably alluded to the fact that you're going to be out longer than you think you're going to be.
Which, by the way, I never was out. I remember it was our biggest month ever at the time. And I was in labor and delivery. And I remember being in Slack, and Christian Beck from Innovate Map signed the contract. And at the time, that was like a really big deal. But I was in the labor and delivery room. And then I was at their office doing a kickoff a week and a half later
Crazy.
because I was dumb. But it's okay.
But no, I mean, that's what I would say. It's like, in that moment, like I was thinking more about myself than you.
Because of what was going on in your life. Yeah. The thing that I admire so much about Jim is his ability to demand excellence without actually telling you that that's what he's demanding. And I just knew that if I worked in his orbit long enough, that I would create a higher standard for myself and I would grow. And I was so hungry to just grow and learn. And I've always had this innate desire that I cannot articulate really to reach my potential. And who knows what that means. But very specifically, there was this moment in time where Jim and I working together meant so much more because I had 2 girls. And it was so important to me that my daughters grew up seeing a mother who never backed down from using her gifts and using her talents to make the world a better place. And I remember thinking to myself, and this is even before I was pregnant with Olive, my second, but I remember in that moment of calling Jim, even back to the beginning of the story, of calling Jim and saying, hey, I want to do something in podcasting, because I was looking at Lennon, and Lennon was born without her lower left leg. I remember thinking to myself, there is no way in hell that I'm going to let her grow up and not let her see me reach my potential, because she's going to be given excuses never to, just because of the way she was born. And I was like, no way. I needed somebody like Jim to push me, to educate me, to grow me, and to not let me make excuses. And when you work with Jim, that is what's going to happen. When we look back on the Sherry Genius journey, Jim was now leaving, but it felt like a changing of the guards in a way, because he officially was leaving the country. He wasn't going to be as available. I mean, he still made himself available, but it was really like, okay, Rachel, you need to lead this team. You need to lead this company. And at the time that he left, it was me and one other employee, Mike Fisher. And I remember Mike and I were in the office that we shared at the time, and Jim had left. And I walked into the office that morning, and I was sitting down, and across from me is where our big whiteboard was. I sat down and just opened my computer, got to work, and I looked up. And on the whiteboard, he had written in all caps at the very top, be great. We continue the story next week with a voice you're more familiar with, Tiffany Souter, and how she encouraged me to see beyond. We've got more of The First Million next week. In the meantime, you can find more from me and my team of producers in our newsletter, Genius Cuts, which, of course, you can find the link to sign up for in the show notes, and check out my podcast, Voicemails with Rachel. See you next week.